All right. Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you so much for signing up and logging in on time for our Lunch and Learn session. Um, this is what we call our Climate Change 101 presentation, going over the science, impacts, and solutions of the climate crisis. This is part of our week of Give Miami Day programming, and we will have a link because we would definitely appreciate your support of our work. If you have questions or comments throughout the presentation, you can put those in the chat. We do have Ian, our office admin extraordinaire, who will be monitoring the chat, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. I'm going to go ahead and get started just to be respectful of everyone's time. So a little bit about us. If you saw our ad and signed up, you might be familiar already. The Clio Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. It is the only organization in Florida that is exclusively dedicated to climate education and advocacy. We work with anyone who is concerned about climate, regardless of, sort of what their industry is and political affiliation and all of that. Everything is about collective solutions that make all of our lives better. And we also know that climate change, as far as topics go, it's changing. It's constantly changing. There's new data being presented. And so we look at reports and data from organizations like NASA and NOAA. We read through the national climate assessments, that's part of the US government, as well as the IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, part of the UN, and try to make it digestible and understandable, and also focusing in on what impacts us here in Florida. So our goal today is to understand the science, urgency, and solutions regarding the climate crisis, and most importantly, that those solutions are just and equitable. Because if we're going to be implementing something that will make life more difficult for people who are already marginalized, then that is not an acceptable solution to us. One of the things I've learned throughout my career as an educator is people don't care what you know until they know that you care. So it's important for us and for y'all, if you go on to, with Thanksgiving coming up, talk with friends and family about climate change and its impacts. What is your climate story? Why do you care about this? And how does it impact you and your community? I grew up as loving nature and animals. I remember back to kindergarten. If you're familiar with those little toys that kids have where they pour sand through a sifter, one of my favorite things to play was in the sandbox. I would have little plastic animals and they were doing their animal things and replicating what I saw on Animal Planet. And I would be pouring the sand through the sifter because I wanted to remove pollution from their environment and save the animals. So I've always been like this. And I was also an avid volunteer up through high school and college, going to nursing homes and Habitat for Humanity and beach cleanups. And what Clio does so well that I really appreciate since coming to work here is bringing together the ideas of environmental conservation and stewardship along with social justice and equity. And I've been able to combine those, better understanding that every human needs clean water, clean air, a healthy, livable environment, and that when we do good for one another and we do good for the earth, that those are one and the same. The crucial thing is the climate crisis is impacting us here and now. This is not something that's happening far away in space or time. And that is a misconception that we've been battling. But after the last year or so, a lot more people are coming to understand, again, what these impacts are and just how urgent it is to address them. Last year, the IPCC report came out again. That's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. You've got scientists and researchers from dozens of countries all working together to better understand what's going on with our climate. And again, what we can do to protect and preserve our natural world and the people in it. But they're sending us a warning. They're calling it code red, that we're breaking records on extreme heat and severe weather and flooding. And that when we call these natural disasters, that has been true in the past, but they're being exacerbated by these human impacts on the environment. This is this is caused by us burning fossil fuels and adding greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. And the people being impacted are those who are least responsible and least equipped to deal with it. When we talk about the scientific consensus, again, as a teacher, I have noticed a lot of misunderstanding about what that means. The consensus here isn't like getting a consensus on where you want to go out to eat, where it's a bunch of people with the same opinion. The scientific consensus is asking people with knowledge and background of these topics what conclusion they draw from a given set of data. So when you have people from all different fields that are geologists and meteorologists and glaciologists and oceanographers all looking at the data and coming to the same conclusion, that is the scientific consensus. And for the people who have the most expertise on this topic, which would be climate scientists and publishing climate scientists, which means that they are currently doing research. They haven't, retired 30 years ago or got a degree and work in a different field. And over 99% of them agree that the overall warming of our planet is increasing. It is caused by human activity. So burning coal, oil, and gas, that includes fossil gas that might be in, stoves and grills and heaters, as well as gasoline, petrol that goes into cars and trucks. When these are burned, they release greenhouse gases, which exacerbates the greenhouse effect. And that, again, it's happening now. But if any of that was news to you, it's perfectly understandable because there has been a concerted effort to misinform the public about what's going on. The same playbook that had that had doctors being paid off and advertising executives from tobacco companies trying to obfuscate the link between lung cancer, emphysema, COPD, and smoking cigarettes, their products that they made profits from. They're using those same tactics to distract from the fact that these companies, BP, Shell, ExxonMobil, Chevron, that their products are making them billions of dollars and yet are harming humans and our planet. Giving both sides on a news report when you have, again, a paid representative from an oil company next to a scientist, fake experts where you'll have people who might have a PhD or a doctorate and present themselves as an expert, but it's in a completely different field. For example, I've seen one where they said Dr. So-and-so versus Dr. So-and-so, but one of them had a degree in climatology and one of them had a degree in computer science. But unless you go digging, you may not immediately know that. And again, it is dishonest and it does misrepresent who really has the full understanding here. And sponsored education, where you have entire science curriculums or exhibits at museums that are sponsored by energy providers and oil and gas companies, because those aren't going to be biased at all, right? So the problem is that when we burn those fossil fuels, it releases a couple different greenhouse gases, primarily carbon dioxide and methane are concerns, although there are others, as well as deforestation. When you take away the trees that absorb this carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, perhaps burn them for fuel, you're also exposing the soil that was storing carbon. And when you hear about the greenhouse effect, a lot of folks only ever hear about it as something negative, when it actually enables life on Earth. It is absolutely vital that we have that we have this atmosphere and this heat trapping blanket, because otherwise the Earth would look like the moon or Mars. The problem is rampant greenhouse gases, that heat trapping blanket around the Earth is becoming too thick and trapping too much heat and throwing the Earth's energy balance out of whack. Primary sources of emissions include transportation, so that's cars as well as long range trucks and trains, electricity generation via power plants that run on fossil gas or coal. There's also lots of different industry applications, including building and concrete, residential and commercial. So your general heating and cooling needs. And then non-fossil fuel combustion, that includes things like agriculture, and other industries. You may have also heard from folks that the climate has changed before and that carbon dioxide levels have fluctuated before. And the best propaganda is built around a kernel of truth. Because what that does not tell you is that those changes for all of human history, we're going back 800,000 years ago. So as long as humans have been on this planet, that those carbon dioxide levels have gone between about 175 and 300 parts per million. And we cruised right through that in the middle of the 20th century. The most recent data we have is for last month, which is 422 parts per million. If you've ever heard someone refer to the hockey stick graph, this is what they're looking at. If you just kind of turn your head a little bit, perhaps you can see it. But again, we have not been at this level of warming or this level of carbon concentration in our atmosphere since before the ice ages. So that's not particularly a world that we're adapted to or want to live in, really. Another important greenhouse gas is methane. This is often released as they frack fossil gas out of the ground. If you've ever heard of flares, methane flares, that's where it comes from. Enteric fermentation, it's not cow farts, it's actually cow burps. But there are ways that we can reduce the methane emissions from agriculture through cattle feed additives and regenerative practices. So, there are definitely ways that we can maintain, our cultural food sources and feed ourselves while reducing those emissions. Methane doesn't last as long in the atmosphere as carbon dioxide does, but while it does, it is 84 times more efficient at trapping greenhouse gases. So this is kind of a low-hanging fruit, because if we address methane, which is, it comes from fewer sources, so it's easier to get a handle on. And this can slow the rate of warming more quickly. When you look at this is looking at the temperature anomalies. So the deviation either above or below the historical average over the last century or so. Blue is colder areas than normal, colder times than normal, and the warmer colors like red and orange are warmer than normal. And you can see that the anomaly is increasing in terms of how much warmer than normal it is, and that we're basically looking at an increased warming over almost all the globe, which again comes back to if someone talks about record cold in a certain area, that does not disprove that the Earth overall is warming, because we're looking at the global average, not a single place, not a single period of time. And you can also see that the area warming the fastest is the Arctic, which is a real concern because there's a lot of glaciers up in the Arctic and then down here in the Antarctic. And that's what leads to permafrost melting and glaciers melting and then sea level rise, which is a huge concern for those of us in a state that is the flattest and lowest state in the US. As any of us can understand, if you've gone through, your basic kindergarten science lessons, that when it gets warmer, ice melts. Land ice, so again, those glaciers in Greenland and Antarctica, is our biggest concern because that contributes directly to sea level rise. Melting sea ice doesn't so much, but when the white cover on the ocean melts and then the dark ocean is revealed, then that does accelerate warming as well. So all the polar ice on land and water are both melting and contributing to the issues. And for South Florida, particularly, the densest areas of population and development are in these low lying coastal regions. I'm sure that all of y'all have experienced flooding before, if not in your house, in your neighborhood, near your workspace, perhaps children's schools. And so if we stay on the current trajectory, we cannot rule out 8 to 10 feet of sea level rise, which impacts almost all of South Florida. And even before we get to that point, South Florida primarily pulls their water from the Biscayne Aquifer, which is basically fresh water stored in a limestone. Like a limestone sponge. It's called karst, and Florida is basically a giant sandbar. So this is the bedrock that underlies most of this state. And it's great in terms of storing water and providing for us through the aquifer. But as the sea level rises, the salt water can mix in with the fresh water. We can desalinate it, but that's going to be more cost, more energy expenditure. And for people who are already struggling to pay utility and water bills, that's just more financial pressure that they may not be able to withstand. We've actually been extremely lucky thus far in terms of impacts here on land because the oceans are a huge moderating force on the world's climate. They've absorbed 93% of excess heat so far. But the oxygen concentrations are declining because of this warming. A practical example is, if you take out a soda and leave it on the counter or in the fridge, it will go flat more quickly on the counter because warmer liquid can't hold as much dissolved gas. In this case, it's going to be dissolved oxygen that's important for sea life. And absorbing that extra carbon dioxide makes the water more acidic. The same reason that soda is acidic and bad for your teeth is that dissolved carbon dioxide, and corals and seashells are made from the exact same minerals as your teeth are. So, that's concerning for wildlife, and for, I believe it's a fifth or more of the world's population that relies on the ocean for their protein needs and their livelihoods. Extreme weather is, another big impact that concerns us here in Florida. We don't necessarily have the data to show that there will be more frequent hurricanes, but of the hurricanes that do happen, they are more likely to be huge, to dump more water, to have higher storm surges, and to move slower. So, as I'm sure you all know, the biggest danger from hurricanes isn't even the wind speed, it's the flooding. And this will absolutely lead to more destructive flooding. And even when it's not a hurricane, when we're just looking at these huge rainfalls, for every 1 degree rise in temperature, you get 4% more water vapor. So if the temperature on a given day is 2 or 3 degrees higher than typical, we're looking at 10 to 15% more water. And every extra inch that falls is more that can overwhelm the land's capacity to absorb it, or even that of our sewer system. And heat waves and extreme heat cause more deaths and illness than basically any other natural disaster combined. Anyone who works outdoors in construction, maintenance, agriculture, transportation is much more vulnerable to this extreme heat, as well as just children wanting to play outside and seeing heat related illness in, for example, student athletes. So with these heat indexes, especially in such a humid place as Miami, that makes it even more difficult for your body to cool itself because we cool ourselves via sweat. We've gotten excessive heat warnings. It's not normal to have heat advisory day after day after day after day, even in Florida, even in the summer. For those of y'all who might be natives of South Florida, lived there for decades, you can probably attest to this, that it's been different from how it was when you were younger. And the loss of productivity in the ocean, the extreme heat, the extreme weather, All of these impact animals and native plants just as much as they do humans, if not more so, because panthers don't really have access to air conditioning. So the things that make Florida beautiful, that make us want to live here, that are, culturally and emotionally enriching, are all in danger as well. And as I said, for those of us, for those of us who are privileged enough to work indoors, not everyone is that lucky. So communities of color, lower income communities, and farm workers, people on fixed incomes who can't necessarily run their air conditioner 24/7, all summer. We call these frontline communities, and again, they are the most vulnerable to the impacts of the climate crisis. But I promise this isn't all doom and gloom. The thing is, we know that the collective we as a species have caused this. But because we caused it, we can fix it. If this was a natural phenomenon, then it might just be inevitable, but it's not. And we can still change our forecasted future. So there are two main types of climate solution. There's mitigation, which is reducing the amount of planet warming greenhouse gases that are emitted in the first place. So anything you do to increase energy efficiency, electrification of our transport system, switching over to renewable energy such as solar, which is a huge industry in the Sunshine State. Mitigation is recognizing that, again, this is happening here and now. And so we need to adapt to what is already going on and make sure that people and the environment are as safe and resilient as they can be. So seawalls are not a viable long-term solution, but restoring wetlands and green infrastructure and rain gardens are much more resilient over the long term. So a big part of what we do here at Clio is civic engagement, is mobilizing communities, especially women and youth, as advocates for the climate. Because individual actions are not what got us into this mess. And you can be a perfect environmentalist. You can live, off the grid, everything is renewable, zero waste lifestyle. But we really need to change these corporate and government policies in order to make the lasting change. And I'm not saying that what you're doing individually or what I'm doing individually aren't important. They are. But we need to make the right choice, the easy choice. So when we work together in collective action, either politically or non-politically within our communities, the goal is to just improve quality of life for the entire community. Because I live in an apartment and have nowhere to charge it. So buying an electric car would be difficult for me. But if we electrify the bus fleet for the entire city, reducing air pollution, the great thing about a lot of these solutions is that they have additional benefits above and beyond reducing greenhouse gas emissions and mitigating the climate crisis. It's important to recognize which level of government can address the problem that you are trying to solve. For example, talking about electrifying the buses. Those are owned here by, I'm in Tallahassee, by the city of Tallahassee, or for y'all, city of Miami, Miami Beach, Homestead, wherever you're logging in from. So that would be who you'd want to talk to. If you want subsidies, for example, the Inflation Reduction Act had a lot of subsidies and incentives to make those kind of moves. Well, then you're going to need to address the federal government and state. So, the state of Florida in the middle. For these kind of things, looking at bills that are going to be passed in the legislature, advocating for or against them is really important. But I will say that for city and county level, if you're just getting started, those are great places to start because it's close enough to home that you can actually meet people face to face and smaller numbers of people can make real change, but it's big enough that you really are making a difference. Another thing we can address is what we call tree equity. Down in South Florida, there's a real correlation between household income and how much tree canopy they have. So urban heat islands is this concept where areas that are more developed, more industrialized, can be 5 to 10 degrees hotter than surrounding rural areas and farmland. So people who are, people who are living in, sort of inner city type of areas, more impoverished areas, they might have apartment buildings that are close together. Think of the sort of the concrete jungle. All of that concrete absorbs and holds on to more sunlight, which then gets re-emitted as heat. And a lot of those folks are also less likely, as I said before, to be able to afford air conditioning 24/7. Running all the air conditioners doesn't exactly help with the heat when you go outside. So focusing on improving access to green space and tree planting in those areas can have a measurable difference on, the temperature as well as the quality of life for folks there, because trees are good for mental and physical health and reduce air pollution. Like I said, every solution has multiple benefits. So when you are working with a large and diverse group of people, meeting them where they are and talking about how it will improve their lives in addition to being good for the planet, can be really helpful to get more folks on board with your ideas. Another thing we can tackle is food waste. When food waste goes into a landfill and it gets trapped under other layers of garbage, without having any access to oxygen, as it decays, it produces methane. So food waste is the third biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. And yeah, over 40% of all food produced in the US is wasted. And that might be being left to rot in the fields if there's, a labor shortage, or if it's not high enough quality to be taken up by grocery stores, or at the level of production and processing and restaurants, or just, we've all been guilty of this, right? Is just that Tupperware in the back of your fridge that you're a little bit afraid to open. So things like meal planning and prepping and going through, community agriculture kind of programs rather than buying from big box stores. And composting is something that you can do with your neighbors and make it a community effort. There are small organizations that do composting and will pick it up from your home. And there are even places where they have municipal compost bins, which is so cool. You'll put out your trash, your recycling, and your food and lawn waste for compost. And that's something that again can be implemented at the city level, or even on a neighborhood level, that can really make a big difference. Shifting, of course, to clean and renewable energy sources. Which source you use is going to depend on your geography, and the logistics of where you're at. We don't really have utility level wind here in Florida, but I'm originally from the Northeast, and that's the best option there. As I said, down here in the Sunshine State, solar panels are going to be our biggest source for renewable energy. And we have here in Tallahassee, we have a municipal solar farm at our airport, which is really cool. The city owns the utilities that we use, or getting them up onto individual roofs or on businesses. And I often hear people talk about economic opportunities and development for people being being contrasted against environmental regulations and protection for the earth. And that drives me nuts. And I really think that speaks to the divide there historically has been between, for example, the labor movement and environmentalists. And that's why intersectionality is so important, because blue collar working folks who might happen to be in a dirty industry are not the enemy here. And they need to be part of the solution. There are more solar jobs with production and installation than there are coal jobs in the whole country. And again, I saw a local news article about a local recycling plant that takes on things like car batteries and old paint and all kinds of things that people want to get rid of but are hazardous to do so yourself. And they're working on their capabilities in terms of recycling solar panels. So There are jobs in solar from producing the panels, which we should be doing a lot more domestically, installing them, maintaining them, and then recycling them at the end of their lifespan so that they don't become yet another source of industrial waste. These jobs should primarily be union jobs because labor justice is climate justice, because people's working conditions matter, especially when they're, up on roofs and they're in heat advisories. And, again, taking care of people is part of our mission. Same thing with wind turbines, production, installation, maintenance, recycling. Urban planning is so important. We have been structuring our cities around the needs of cars and traffic basically since post-World War II. But having increased access to green spaces and walking paths and biking paths and public transit improves mental, physical health, air quality, all of that. And we need people making those points at those levels of government. And yeah, retrofitting the cities as they are now. And um, I'm very bookish. I joke that I'm a useless academic. Um, but I can talk about how great solar is until I'm blue in the face, and it won't do any good unless we have HVAC technicians and electricians and CNC machinists and welders who are doing all of this. So those kind of trades and vocational jobs are really important. And also as we electrify transit, installing those kinds of the charging stations and all that. And same kinds of jobs. So it doesn't just have to be a 4-year degree in environmental science, for example. There are lots and lots of opportunities. And it only takes 3.5% of the population to really drive change. Think about the civil rights era or women's suffrage. We didn't have the majority of all citizens out in the streets making those demands and having protests and rallies and meeting with legislators. It was a smaller group of really dedicated people. I like to think I'm one of those, and hopefully y'all are as well. So here is Gen Cleo Lobby Day from last year. Coming up to Tallahassee, we had over 100 meetings with elected officials in 24 hours, and it was majority, high school, college students, but we also had, older community members, parents. There was another big rally with a lot of folks in the solar field earlier that helped kill a bill that would have reduced the economic viability of solar. And it was really powerful. So I am asking all of y'all to be part of the solution. If you would like to support our work, Thursday, November 17th to the 21st, so we're smack in the middle of that, right around Give Miami Day. If you scan this QR code, it will take you to a donation page. So if you appreciate this and you want to contribute to our work, we would definitely appreciate it so we can keep doing this. For every $1 we raised last year, we were able to get, I think it's $160 in funding for climate projects across the state of Florida in solar and retrofitting and resilience projects. So I guess we're going to go ahead and open up for questions. I know Ian has been the one sort of keeping an eye on the chat, but
there you go. Thank you, Karolyn.
There you go. Stop sharing.
Looking to see in the chat if you have questions. Feel free to type them in the chat. You can also raise your hand or turn on your cameras to unmute yourself to ask. It looks like I had 1 or 2 questions come in by not through the open chat, but through like private messaging. So one of the things I see here is, if this is making hurricanes worse, that's going to make my insurance worse. I'm already paying a fortune every year. It's crazy in Florida. That's not a question, but perhaps we can speak to that situation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I believe the average, and I don't know what you are paying in particular, but I publicly available info. The average homeowner's insurance is $6,000 a year. So that's $500 a month, which is 4 times the national average. And here's the thing, insurance companies are leaving the state. There is an insurance crisis in terms of people being able to get the protection they need when they encounter these kind of disasters. And for folks who are in doubt, that, this is as bad as we say it is. I sincerely doubt that the actuaries trying to make money for insurance companies are buying into any kind of hoax. Um, I am not an expert on that industry. But yeah, resilience projects that, for example, reduce flooding and can reduce the amount of risk a given home or area is in, I think would help with that. I do think that we need state and national level legislation, maybe having some kind of public option for home insurance and restoration. Um, Again, that is not the field I'm an expert in, but I would just say that, yeah, the resilience projects that will reduce the storm damage should reduce the amount of insurance liability, um, would be my best answer for that.
Thanks. And again, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. This is another one of those that I guess came in privately. I gotta check the settings on it. This person asked, I'm super worried about climate change and I want to talk about it with my friends and family, but I'm not an expert and I'll worry I'll mess up the facts and that I won't convince anyone to do something about this. Do you have any advice for me?
I mean, for that, I would say you are taking the first step, coming here today. And what I would recommend is don't get into the nitty gritty on facts and statistics. Listen, my background is as a science teacher. I love the nitty gritty on facts and statistics. The average person that I'm talking to does not. I joke about how I find um, I find graphs and charts about how many people get flooded out of their homes more compelling than an individual story, because I'm like, well, I want to help you, but that doesn't tell me anything about the bigger picture. But stories are really what move the majority of people. So talking about, what have you observed? Have you experienced flooding, damage to your home? Has someone that you know experienced that? Remembering again those heat advisories from last summer and those impacts. So talking about it in terms of, again, those local impacts can be really helpful for that. Um, if you go to our website, we have lots of resources actually. So if you want to get a simple infographic or just a couple talking points, keep coming to Clio events. Eventually, you'll definitely learn more over time. And I know that you're talking about this on an interpersonal level, but if you have groups, if you have a group that gets together and does, um, gaming or hiking or some sort of community service or a faith community, we can do these kind of our climate change 101 talks. We do them for free. If we're close enough, we can do them in person or Zoom if not. So yeah, if you have a bigger group that you would like us to come talk to, please reach out and we are more than happy to do that. Um, and then we can be the experts. But again, for that interpersonal stuff, talking about those impacts and things that you've seen on the news can be a really good way to get started.
That's great advice. I've heard some of that too, and it kind of makes me think of some of the things that I've looked at where we feel like maybe this is an issue a lot of people don't want to hear about, but from what we've looked at in the research, it seems most people want action on this issue, even if we're not talking about taking action on this issue. So keeping that in mind, for me, has helped with my anxieties talking to people. I have a question here. This person says, my friend just put solar on her house and I'm super jealous. I would love to put them on my house, but I rent and my landlord is nice but isn't into it. Is there anything I can do?
That is a tough one. I am in the same position and I get it. I would say that advocating for municipal solar can be a good way to sort of get involved. There's an organization we frequently work with called Solar United Neighbors. I don't know if we have that link handy. Um, they do these microgrids where a bunch of neighbors will get together, maybe a homeowners association, and sort of share the load and the cost for solar. Um, you can get a lot of individual solar items for. I'm seeing more and more like solar phone chargers, and smaller solar generators. um, so doing what you can. in terms of individual solar opportunities, and then pushing for municipal solar would be where I'd focus my efforts. I would also say that for the landlord, there are right now, if you have a good enough relationship with them, which I've got like a corporate property management company, so they're definitely not going to listen to me. But if it's a human you can talk to, the kind of subsidies and tax write-offs and the incentives from the Inflation Reduction Act, it might make sense for them. So if you wanted to send them some information, we've done whole presentations before about the IRA, which again, like Ryan, again, I don't know if we have anything to hand, but yeah, showing them that it can be cost effective and improve the value of the building might work out for the landlord, especially if like electricity is included in your rent rather than you paying separately for usage.
Fantastic. I see that we have a comment here. I have a group that I'm part of that I'm interested in organizing a working group for climate change. The group is quite large. I'm interested in pushing for electric public transportation, but I was wondering if you know if that is something I would have to go through county commission meetings. Basically, how exactly would I start pushing for that?
Oh, Ian, that group, I think Nick Duran works for them now, the Transit Alliance, something like
It
that.
might be something. I'm going to do a quick search to see if that's the case.
So I know we have someone that we've worked with before who is working with an organization that does directly push for that. I'm also familiar with an organization called Strong Towns. Big fan. They're very nonpartisan in what they advocate for, which is financially sustainable community development. And a big part of that is public transportation and what we call human-centered development, rather than being centered around cars. So yeah, Ian, if you could link to Strong Towns as well, they have guidebooks and workshops on becoming a strong town. And the great thing about that is that they discuss, again, financial sustainability, which can be more convincing to like city and county commissioners, alongside environmental, human health, quality of life aspects. So again, their workshops and resources, and anyone who's, anyone in your area who's affiliated with them, I think is a really excellent resource. Also, keep up with Clio because we have action alerts and we do phone banking and send things out. And often, it does relate to that. Depending on what bills come up in the upcoming legislative session, we may be arguing for or against bills relating to public transit and electrification. So yeah, sign up for our newsletter, get the particularly the policy newsletter, and there might be ways you can get involved directly with Clio as well.
For
Awesome. I'm
Transit Alliance, Strong Towns, and the newsletter links in the chat. I also see in the chat, there's a question. I'm on the board of my community's HOA. Where again is the info I can present to them for solar?
Highly recommend Solar United Neighbors for that one. They often have Zoom, like Zoom webinars on intro to solar, and there might already be a group in your area, wherever that's at, that is actively working on it. So I think the link is, yeah, is in there from earlier, but we can definitely post it again.
The link that is Solar United Neighbors, I'm just going to copy paste it one more time so it is visible there. Thank you everyone who is commenting with some questions. We're happy to field them through to the end of the session. I have this comment that came in. Heard that electric cars aren't so good for the environment. A short question, but to the point.
No solution is perfect, and it would be remiss of us not to address that. I would also say electric cars are still cars, and private vehicles are the least efficient and least sustainable form of transport you can have. So if all we do is take our existing car culture and car ownership rates and transfer them from internal combustion engines over to electric, that actually isn't solving the problem. Advocating, again, for more walkable cities and sidewalks and bike paths and all of that is a huge part of that transition. So yeah, if they were our only solution, that would not be a just and sustainable solution as far as we're concerned. I will say that they're improving. The longevity of the batteries, the ability to recycle the batteries is improving. I'm seeing more advertisements pop up asking for like used car batteries and things like that. The infrastructure to deal with them as they, as we maintain them and then as they eventually will become obsolete, is getting there. So I will say that, yeah, reducing the necessity of car ownership is just as important as electrifying what we have. Um, and yeah, if you've got a coal-fired power plant and then you plug it into the wall, it is actually still more efficient than an internal combustion engine. But again, that's not the end of the story. It's just that when you have an electric car, you have the potential to run it off of clean energy. Whereas with a gas-powered car, that's totally off the table. So yeah, they're not a perfect solution. They're still better than the alternative. I mean, if you think that lithium mining is terrible for the environment, you should see mountaintop removal coal mining. It is so much worse. But yeah, the conditions that the workers who are mining those minerals in is often terrible. And yeah, that just, it needs to be a consideration. And I would say that, yeah, that public transit and non and yeah, and getting away from the requirement for public private car ownership would be the most just, equitable, and sustainable solution we have.
Yeah, I'm not seeing, we're getting close to the end of our questions here. I've got this last one. It reads, this might be a little specific, but that's okay. If there's disinformation on climate science, where do you look for trusted news?
Hi. Uh, um, I will say there's, I don't know if there's any directly on the website about it, but you can have my email. I am always happy to answer specific questions about misinformation and disinformation. That's kind of my, you can ask Ian. I'm very annoying about it. That is my personal soapbox. Um, the couple really great resources, Skeptical Science, the website. The website's a little bit clunky, not gonna lie, but any false thing that's ever been said about climate change, you will find it on there somewhere. Um, they're a really good resource, as is Clio. We have a video on our website that is specifically about addressing misinformation and disinformation. Um, I have I have whole lesson plans. So if you're in any kind of educational space or just want to look it over, I have multiple presentations and worksheets on addressing this. Um, and yeah, if you want to reach out to us directly, but a lot of it is looking at bias, trying to figure out who wrote this and why. Digging into the author. Are they a journalist? Are they, do they work for a government agency? Do they work for a fossil fuel company? Where the funding is. Is this sponsored content? Is this an ad? And trying to directly counter it, especially if you're hearing it from someone, interpersonally. I wish. I wish humans could hear, you're wrong about that, and here's why, and not immediately get defensive and dig in their heels and yell at you. That has not been my experience. So kind of a Socratic method, again, if this is interpersonal rather than seeing something on social media, or I mean, if it's like your friend posting it, I haven't heard that before. Where did you get that information from? Why do you think that is? You're not going to get anyone giving a confession about, oh no, I've been taken in by misinformation, and this was there to mislead me all along, and I'm going to, I'm going to be an intersectional environmentalist going forward. But planting the seeds of asking folks to further interrogate what they're saying and why they're saying it, especially if you do have an interpersonal relationship already, that can get them hopefully on a better path.
Fantastic answer. I see that there is another question in the chat. This individual says, I'm based in Miami and I'm interested in mangrove restoration. I have a couple of restoration sites on Biscayne Bay, but have found municipal support for mangrove restoration is severely lacking. Any suggestions for NGO support for this? Since it's a Miami specific question and I'm in Miami, off the top of my head, I don't know any specifically. I do know mangroves to be a fantastic solution for a lot of our but I can't name any specific NGOs off the top of my head.
Would Miami Waterkeeper be a good resource for that?
Miami Waterkeeper might not be a bad place to reach out to. Gonna do a quick search for their URL in a second. There might be a person to connect with, even if they don't have the answer you're looking for, they might know another organization that can be of support. Um, Hopefully that is helpful.
Um, Also, I'm not sure. Welcome. I'm not sure how old the person asking is. I mean, everyone is welcome in the Gen Clio chat. I often, when I see things like contests and scholarships, a lot of times they are for environmental restoration type projects. So yeah, if you're able to join the WhatsApp chat for Gen Clio, yeah, I'm often seeing things like that and posting them for the students to take advantage of if that's something they want to explore.
I think that's all the questions I have so far. If you have a question, feel free to type it into the chat for us to field answers for. Presentation on paper goes until 1:30. Yeah, if there are no more questions, I want to thank everyone who came today.
I have a question. Hi, I'm Yaleen. I'm based in Miami and I'm gonna be graduating in the spring. Um, I initially I wanted to get into corporate social responsibility. In light of the election, I'm thinking maybe something more nonprofit. Um, so what would you guys' like advice be for someone like me?
Have you heard of Gen Clio?
Yes. I think well, I'm at FIU and I think there's a chapter here. I'm not sure, but
They're ab
I would like to get involved with Clio Institute, but I'm not sure how that will go in terms of, finding a position there. So I just mean kind of like in general, like your advice.
I would say a lot of what I find that I do then go and post for the students. Um, I'd recommend starting up a LinkedIn profile. It's basically social media based around jobs,
Mhm.
and they also have a job search function. If you look up, you can look up like nonprofits, environment Miami area, get a list, follow them on LinkedIn and social media because when we go into the spring, that basically is internship season. So a lot of those things will be posted again on various social media, on Instagram. So yeah, definitely hook up with Gen Clio. We have like interns and organizers who work with us, if that's something you're interested in. And if it's not, or you have a different, sort of like a different thing in mind, um, yeah, I would say look up things like Miami Waterkeeper, and see in your local Sierra Club, and there's the Tropical Audubon Society down there. Again, follow, sign up for their newsletters. A lot of them will have, a newsletter option on their website or their social media feeds, and then just regularly keep an eye on it. And when those opportunities come up, uh, what is it? Luck favors the prepared.
Fortune favors the bold.
Yeah, there you go. Fortune favors the bold. So even if you think that you're not necessarily uh, super qualified, if you don't meet every bullet point, apply anyway. Women and girls are especially bad at promoting themselves. So promote the heck out of yourself. And that would be, I mean, quite frankly, that's how I got this job. Is that I did a lot of local like organizing and volunteering, and someone I knew through a group that I volunteered with sent me this job listing that she saw on Facebook, and offered to sort of be a reference for me. So get involved, even if you just start by volunteering. That's how you start networking, make those connections via maybe the kids aren't necessarily on LinkedIn as much, but maybe on your Instagram or something, and just keep an eye out. And if you do join up with Gen Cleo, that's another really great network of people who probably know, like, hey, I interned with Miami Transit Authority or Association, whatever it's called, the Transit Alliance last year, and they're looking for somebody for this spring, and I think you'd be great for that. So yeah, networking with people who have similar goals and values is another really great way to hear about things, and then also to get like references and recommendations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great. I love like listening to other people who also understand like climate change, and but sometimes it can feel like you're kind of in an echo chamber, and then when you're out kind of outside of that echo chamber, it's like, dang, like nobody really, it's like you kind of feel lonely in like this information. It's really interesting. But how would you say, like, aside from obviously like advocating and doing what you can, um how would you say like you guys deal with that?
I think a really great way to deal with that is by focusing on the intersectionality issues. So, for example, access to safe and affordable transit is something that a lot of people can get on board with who may not know or understand what's going on with the climate. But then, of course, that's a climate solution. The Farm Workers Association, the quality of life and pay and and workers' rights for agricultural workers is really important. It's been it's been a tradition in this country to fight for better conditions, and those folks again may not be aware of what's going on with the climate, but it very much affects them. So looking at any issue through a climate lens, and then talking to people who already care about that issue, and what we call connecting the dots is, is how I get a lot of people sort of involved. I have a friend who works with the city's housing authority. And so they do a lot of education and sort of guiding first-time homeowners on buying homes and maintaining them, and all of that, get people out of the poverty and rent cycle. Access to safe housing is, a climate issue and a climate solution. So yeah, connecting the dots between the things that people already care about, we call it also like meeting them where they are, and then showing them how these climate solutions will also improve their material conditions. I've said before, like, I don't care if you believe the earth is flat. If you're into like, like those, some of the off the grid people have very interesting ideas, but they tend to really like solar panels. So I'll work with you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And like I said, if anything specific comes up, please never hesitate to reach out to us as a resource. More than happy to answer questions.
Of course, will do.
I think that about wraps things up for today. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
You as well. We appreciate it from everyone.